as I edge ever so gingerly through late middle age, late middle age now extends to the early part of the next century. As I get older, I have become more and more convinced that one of the greatest blessings in life is to get up in the morning with your thoughts turned out instead of in. To get up interested in something outside oneself. To get up committed to, today I get to do that. I get to talk to her. I get to see him. I'm going to be working on this issue. Today I get to be turned out instead of in. To be turned in on oneself is a very sure way to come to despair. The need to turn out, the need to give oneself away, grows constantly throughout our lives. I am beginning to suspect it may be more important for us as we get older than even when we were younger. Because when we were younger, we were more obviously and more constantly and more insistently called upon by people around us. But as we get older, it becomes easier and easier to whittle the ties down, to get the connections a little, they're not as many and they're not as strong, it sometimes seems. And if that happens, bit by bit, the mind turns in on itself. And there is an immense loneliness in that. It is a constant effort to turn oneself out, because that's what hope is. It's about reaching out because we are so completely confident that there is one reaching toward us, that God is always reaching toward us, and that's why we reach back. What does that mean at this point in the life of the Christian community? Because you see, we never come to God alone. We always come to God in conjunction with everybody else. God always brings us into his love as a member of a people, as part of the kingdom, as part of what, in the Christian tradition, we've called for a long time the church, what Vatican II calls the people of God. It's because we are always connected to others that we are a people of hope. There is a danger in that, however, and the danger is that if the community disappoints us, that it can badly damage our hope. Now, if you are not disappointed in the Roman Catholic Church at the present time, you must be comatose. There is a profound disappointment in the way in which the community has lived, the way it reacts to how it lives, how it structures itself, who it invites to enter into ministry, whose word it recognizes as preaching, who it recognizes as an official minister of the church. There are profound disappointments, I think, for many, many, many of us at this point in the church. What does that mean? Well, one of the things we have to do is we're used to the idea of asking for forgiveness from the community. It's a very important thing at points that we forgive the community. You see, this is where I think some knowledge of the history of the church is so important. Peter and Paul didn't get to see the church advance toward the kingdom of God with all flags flying. They would have liked it, but they never saw it. Francis of Assisi would have loved to have seen the church march into the kingdom. He never saw it. Teresa of Avila would have loved it. Thomas Aquinas would have loved it. Catherine of Siena would have loved it. John Henry Newman would have loved it. Lots of people would have loved it and never saw it. Why in heaven's name should I think that I'll see it? As usual, the church will move toward the kingdom, but it will go pushed and pulled and dragged, kicking and screaming and protesting the whole time. And then when it gets there, it will say, just as we always taught. It is that conviction that God doesn't drop us, even though we don't deserve it to be held, that God never drops us, that is not only the source of our ability to live with ourselves in hope, but to live with one another in hope. And to live with those in the community who seem to think that they don't need forgiveness because they can't believe that they've ever done anything wrong. The inability to recognize one's own inability is the worst inability of all. Blindness to one's own blindness is the worst loss of vision. And that may be what we experience at the present time, not only at the church, but at lots of communities. You see, reaching out to others is always a danger. And the danger is that when the people will not accept the gift. The single most painful experience, in my opinion, that human beings ever go through is being an unrequited lover, of trying to give themselves away to the other for the other's good and not being received, not being accepted, being taken for granted, or being flat out rejected. To be willing to face that danger and that pain, to be willing to accept it as part of the constant reaching out, is of the very essence of hope. To be constantly willing to reach out to people who don't seem to be interested in our reaching toward them at all is absolutely key to living out the virtue of hope. That's true of all of us in relation to our families, to circles of friends. It's true of our society, our secular society. It's true of our country. And it is true of the church. What do? We go on hoping. That's what's so necessary. Because you see, in hope, we end up doing what God does.